The best composition for every single Overwatch League team. It's a fan-favorite tradition we've been doing the last couple of years. Although, this is the first time we're doing it with Overwatch 2 involved, so it makes it a bit more fun and interesting. The concept is as simple as it sounds though overall if you're new to this. We're going to go through every single team and decide which composition they looked the strongest on. In other words, what combination of heroes allowed for them to be at their absolute best. I tend to look at things like dominance, win percentage, and general comfort when making this type of decision, and it's not always easy, especially for the teams who were, well, kind of bad. But as always, I'll do my best. Here's what I think every team's best composition was in 2022. Atlanta Reign, Doomfist, Tracer, Sojourn from the Midseason Madness. Now, Atlanta were a little all over the place in 2022, but they found a good bit of success in the first half of the year. Playing around Hawks Doomfist led to a ton of super clutch victories, especially during the mid-season tournament, which is obviously the most important time to show up in a season during these big moments. Kai's MVP level Sojourn at the time, plus Venom's formidable Tracer helped beat a plethora of teams from both the West and the East, and that's what's the most impressive about their performance with these three core characters. To beat the top three teams in APAC plus Houston is pretty darn good. I don't think the Reign ever looked more competent than they did at this point in time. Everything was clicking and the squad looked comfortable out there. Easy choice. The Boston Uprising. A mediocre team like Boston didn't show a ton of obvious strengths this year, but there definitely was some appreciation out of me for this squad during the Countdown Cup. More specifically, when they ran Punk on either D.Va or Zarya with a Baptiste and or Zen in the mix. Boston actually seemed like a confident team when they could run these heroes. Punk and the double flex supports that they ran kind of helped open up the game for their DPS. You play around Punk and you let him carry you to victory, and then you add in two explosive support options on their comfort picks, and suddenly you have a team that might actually be kind of scary to deal with. The rest of the core was pretty interchangeable though. They did pretty alright when they had Valentine on Tracer, or if they had Seeker in the game on Sojourn, but this part of the lineup always seemed to change, so it's not as important as the tank and the supports in this situation. Their competitive nature seemed to skyrocket when they played these heroes. They put up their best qualifier on the year during the Countdown Cup, and ultimately were able to seal up that final North American play-in spot. While not spectacular by any means, it did help them get some notable wins over Houston, in Florida, and then Washington during the play-ins. Boston were never more successful at any point this year, so it's hard to pick anything else. The Chengdu Hunters. It's just gotta be that mid-season madness dive comp they like to run. I'm talking Sojourn, Winston and or Ball, Genji, Ana, and Zen. This was the one time of the year where the Hunters could truly embrace the chaotic style they love so much and play to their realm of comfort. It's sad because they only went 3-3 this stage, but it still is the best qualifier of their entire season. This is when Jinmu and Leaf could put in the most work without having to worry about the rest of their team conforming to a meta they maybe weren't spectacular at. The result was a good win over Philly and their only win of the season against the LA Valiant, and the fact that they could push an undefeated 6-0 Seoul team that stage to a map 5 is pretty spectacular. They weren't dominant by any stretch of the imagination, but they sure were competitive, and in a season where the Hunters were kind of depressing, that's pretty good for them. The Dallas Fuel. Oh lord, you could go with a couple of different things in this scenario. Their Zarya comps, Junker Queen Rush, the playoff meta, they were all incredible strengths of this amazing Dallas team. But I'm gonna have to go with their Junker Queen Rush comp. They might have won a championship with the Winston Kiriko meta, let's say, but there were some pretty close calls in that tournament, because it's not like they won the grand finals convincingly, you know? It was a pretty hard-earned victory. But in the Summer Showdown, they were basically cruising to the championship outside of like one game. And considering you had to play more games compared to what they did in the playoffs, that's pretty good. Were they a perfect team? No. There were a few close calls for sure, but they did make it look easy as time went on. Hanbin was just so clearly the best Junker Queen in the league, and with Sparkle backing him up on the Genji and everything, they were basically never gonna lose. They went 10-0 with this composition. Like, that is consistent, that is dominant, and that is brilliance at its finest. The Florida Mayhem. I'm gonna go with the Countdown Cup composition for these guys. The thing about Florida is they often had a lot of inconsistencies. They could get the job done, but never really exceed any real expectations on any specific comp. That is until I witnessed them roll out the Zarya Genji Sojourn BAP. That changed my perspective. because they were putting everybody in their place once they fully committed to it. For starters, someone was a very underrated Zarya player with one of the highest damage rates in the entire league, but then you're surrounding him with 3 guys on their comfort picks. Hydron's amazing Sojourn, Checkmate's Genji, and RuPaul's really good Baptiste. I mean, they all excelled in their respective roles, leading to a well-rounded team environment where literally anybody could beat you. When you're not purely depending on like 1 or 2 guys, you become a really difficult team to stop, and I think we saw that firsthand with the Mayhem during this time period. This composition was pretty short-lived overall, just a couple of weeks in fact, but the Mayhem dominated harder than they ever had the entire year and were able to ultimately punch their ticket to the playoffs without breaking much of a sweat. And that's pretty big since Florida usually took time to adjust to new comps. Guangzhou Charge, Countdown Cup Zarya comps. Some might argue they were more exciting during the Summer Showdown since that's when they made a tournament run and started their resurgence on the year. But in a lot of those games, they kind of just escaped by the skin of their teeth. And when the tournament came, they didn't win a single map. But in the Countdown Cup, the Charge continued to build upon that momentum they had. Their play looked and felt more refined. They yet again posted a 4-2 qualifier, but with a higher map differential and just some more clean performances in general. Only 1 blowout loss came their way. Every other match either resulted in a competitive loss, a clutch win, or a dominant showing. This stage included big wins over the Fusion in Shanghai, and they even eliminated the red-hot Valiant from playoff contention once and for all. And they were just 1 map away from making the play-in finals as well. The addition of Piggy to the starting lineup paid off big time right away with some very dominant-looking Zarya showings. And with Choi and Jimmy putting in the work on Sombra, Tracer, Genji, and Sojourn, the Charge's crazy playmaking potential made them pretty difficult to stop. My guy Choi finally got the help he rightfully deserved after almost 2 seasons, and I couldn't be happier for the guy. He was really able to pop off with better resources behind him, and the Charge were able to flourish and almost completely turn around their season from the grave. Hangzhou Spark, Kiriko Winston playoff comp. Probably one of the biggest no-brainers in this entire video. The Spark were easily the most complete-looking roster during the playoffs. The DPS were clicking just like in the first half of this season, but unlike then, they were just getting a lot more contributions out of everybody else on the roster at the same time. Shy could do his usual thing on Sojourn, then you had Alpha with big Death Blossoms, but then you have people like Gushwei, who had a bit of a comeback with an efficient Winston, and Taro, who was probably one of the best Kirikos in the Overwatch League. The Spark were just in a very ideal environment, which led to numerous big-time playoff wins and a top 4 finish overall. For a team that was inconsistent all season and full of uncertainties, this is a big step up. The Houston Outlaws. You can go one of 2 ways with them. Maybe you prefer a Doomfist composition, since that's kind of what enabled Dante to be at his best. But if you ask me, the Outlaws were at their most impressive when busting out the playoff composition. There is a potential weakness, of course, to expose here with Dante and Winston and his inexperience and whatnot, but I think how the team performed in general is enough to make up for it. The DPS were the main stars of Houston, and the playoffs gave them the chance to shine. Merit and Pelican were absolutely top Sojourn and Reaper players respectively, but aside from that, the Outlaws just have a tendency to never be all that scary during the regular season. They can just never post enough of those big wins to be deemed a true threat. And when it came to tournaments, they were usually just a one and done type of thing. But the playoffs absolutely helps change that narrative. To beat the grand finals runner-ups, make the winners finals, and absolutely smack a solid Spitfire team is a massive improvement. The Outlaws have never done this well in franchise history, so I rest my case. London Spitfire, Reinhardt Rush. Yeah, there's no reason to really explain this one. It was their signature strategy. The London Spitfire consistently ran this composition throughout 2022 and found a lot of success on it while easily being the best on it too. Matching them seemed like it was absolutely futile. It wasn't all that viable of an option in general since it felt more like an anti-meta pick, but London adopted this style of play and they were difficult to stop. The Spitfire played as a true unit. They'd follow their Chad Hadi into battle and would often come out with some improbable victories. Hadi on the Rhine plus Backbone on the May, Sparker on Sojourn, and Landon on the BAP just made them an absolute threat to even some of the strongest teams in the Overwatch League. Everyone played their role, and it worked beautifully. And again, the fact that they were sometimes defying the meta with it and still walking away victorious is absolutely incredible. They defied all logic and won through their comfort alone. Very iconic stuff. LA Gladiators, Winston Tracer Lucio. An oddly specific entry for the boys in purple, but one that clearly demonstrated high levels of success. The Glads were obviously at their best in the first half of 2022. That's when they were winning their stage titles and everything. And these three main comfort picks seemed to be a major reason why it was possible. Between Funny Astro being really clutch and the other two being roll star level on their heroes, the Glads were able to capture multiple tournament trophies. And in that time span, they posted an otherworldly 7-13 overall record between qualifiers and tournament matches. And considering they used this comp to get wins over teams like San Francisco and Dallas, who they usually struggled against on the year, that's all the more reason to pick this comp without looking back. The LA Valiant. Just going off general peak and competitive prowess, the Valiant were certainly at their most competent during the Tracer Sombra Winston dive in the Countdown Cup. That's when things seemed to click the most for this group and when it felt like the Valiant had their best chance of turning around their year. The leadership of Marvel plus the reliable pick rate of Becky's Tracer helped this Valiant team be pretty competitive throughout the majority of this tournament. It didn't really feel like you could count them out, which is not something that could be said for most of this year. At 3-3, they were right in the thick of it, and the cherry on top is that clutch factor. Failure in Map 5s was a huge problem for this group in 2022, but definitely not in the Countdown Cup. They were 3-0 in Map 5s during this stretch, showing that they knew how to make the more game-defining plays with this comp when it really mattered. The Valiant Sombra dive was a threat in that final month of play. Pretty impressive stuff from an otherwise unimpressive group. NYXL Junker Queen Brawl comp. To be honest with you, there's not much that goes into this pick. New York were terrible and never had any success or consistency for that matter. Although, if we're gonna go off their peak, it just has to be the Summer Showdown by default. At a 31% map win percentage and 2 victories under their belts, New York were able to peak on the season. Kellen was able to put in a bit more work individually, and Yaki carried like crazy on the Genji. And they arguably had their most clutch feat of the entire season with a miraculous reverse sweep against a far superior Outlaws roster. It's sad because this team generally got 3-0'd most of the time during this stage, but their 2 wins, and one of them being that Outlaws upset, are hard to overlook when compared to all of their other results on the year. By default, I would consider this to be their best composition of 2022. The Paris Eternal. Oh lord, doing this one's kind of painful. When you win just one game the entire season and generally look pretty uncompetitive, you can't exactly call yourself a master at any one thing. Considering when that lone victory came though, I'd say the Eternals' #1 composition was Tracer, Sojourn, Sigma. A pretty weird combo, but one that I guess worked for them. Dove, Wub, and Vestola did just enough to sneak out a very close victory against New York during the midseason madness to avoid going winless this year. With this being one of their only clutch feats of the entire season, and their only win for that matter, you can't really go anywhere else. This gave them the lone taste of success to touch their lips, so this one wins out by default. The Philadelphia Fusion. I'm going with their midseason madness ball composition. If there was ever a time when Philly felt magical, it was during their midseason madness qualifiers and tournament run, and throughout this run, they relied on a very specific comp. Belos Rhea on the Wrecking Ball with their DPS on Ashe and/or Sojourn, plus Tracer, and the supports utilizing Zen Brig or Zen Ana. Everything about it gave some good teams a lot of trouble. Belos Rhea caused a lot of disruptions on the Wrecking Ball, and their split style of play in general made teams pretty confused. They were hitting you from all sorts of different angles, and their guys all were making contributions. MN3 on the Ashe, Zest getting those critical pulse bomb sticks, Fixa hitting some big sleep darts, and even Aim God got in on the action with some big frags on Zen. You gotta appreciate the Fusion's well-rounded nature when utilizing this composition. It felt like any one of them could be the reason that your team lost the game, and as a result, Philly looked the best they did all season arguably. They beat some solid teams from both regions en route to a 4th place finish in the midseason madness. The Fusion put in some real work and had a lot of their most clutch moments of the entire season in this span. That ball comp was a problem. The San Francisco Shock. This one might come as a surprise to some of you. You might be thinking that it's gotta be the playoff comp or some sort of trace or dive variant, but I personally thought that their best composition, by a good bit honestly, was Sigma Bap Zen with double sniper or whatever else they preferred to play at DPS. It was not only dominant, but also when the team felt the most well-rounded. Part of the Shock's problem this year when they were failing was that they were over-relying on Proper to win games. But when they busted this bunker type of style out on Circuit Royale, you knew the enemy team was in big trouble. Finn and Violet is one of the most terrifying flex support combos in the entire league, and Kaluj was arguably the league's #1 Sigma, and that's on top of having Proper to make plays for you. The Shock absolutely owned Circuit Royale. My math could be off, and forgive me if it is, but I count a 10-1 record on Circuit Royale outside of the Summer Showdown when everybody just one-trick Junker Queen. Their Sig Sniper Bap Zen felt unbreakable at certain points. Even the best teams in the Overwatch League were at their mercy. And again, the fact that everybody on the roster could be a contributor on a regular basis made this a really strong comp for the San Francisco Shock, and because of that, I find it really hard to go against. Seoul Dynasty, Kickoff Clash, Tracer Winston Dive. Throughout the entirety of 2022, there remained a big constant for the Dynasty. Prophet and Smurf being the true leaders. And when were they able to elevate their team to the highest level? When they had access to their signature heroes, of course. So long as the team could rally behind these two in a dive scenario, there was basically no stopping them. Their individual carries were incredible and very clutch, but their work in unison was pretty noteworthy as well, and that's kind of what made them the most dangerous, as their dive synergy was at a different level. It often felt like the two of them could turn a fight in Seoul's favor all on their own. They really were that deadly of a combo. It didn't matter what else they had around them, so long as they were up and still alive, there was a chance Seoul could win. That Winston Tracer Soldier with Ana Lucia was a classic for Seoul, as it helped them deliver their first ever tournament trophy in franchise history. Their comfort with it gave Seoul fans something they have been waiting 5 years for, essentially. Easy pick here. Shanghai Dragons, Junker Queen Rush. The Dragons were not what they once were in 2022 compared to previous years. They largely could not maintain their dominance anymore. However, when the Summer Showdown came around, they felt like they were in top form again. Aside from winning the stage title, the comp generally played up to what makes Shanghai so great. That reliance on teamwork and perfect synergy made it a match made in heaven. It was so easy for them to win fights, even when it felt like they shouldn't. It always felt like it was winnable for this group, just like the Dragons of old. Lip just absolutely crushed it on the Sojourn, and the team always seemed to play better with Who Are You in the lineup, so that helped too. The Dragons were so insanely dominant in the Junker Queen meta. It was quite frankly terrifying. There was literally zero doubt about them not taking home first place. I mean, 3 map losses in 9 games is absurd. No team crushed the competition harder this year than Shanghai did during the Junker Queen Brawl meta. Toronto Defiant, Junker Queen Brawl with Ashe. Toronto are notorious for being called mid by this community. It's a tag they just never are able to escape. It might have been for a short time, but during the Summer Showdown, they were able to shed that label for a little with a 4-2 record and a 3rd place finish in the tournament. Those are the best results this franchise has seen in history. It truly felt like the first time in a long time where you truly had to take them seriously. And it's funny how they did it too. Sojourn so heavily dominated this meta, but Hisu opted to play the Ashe instead, and he was still actually just completely diffing his opponents. They had their own unique flavor on this meta, and it really worked for them. Their tournament run was genuinely impressive, and they stayed competitive throughout. To beat Houston, Florida, Gladiators, and the Reign is pretty sweet, and they even made San Fran and Dallas have to earn their wins over them. Toronto looked and felt like a truly confident contender for once. They were in their element and were easily one of the best teams in the league during this time. There was some actual magic in the air for them. There is absolutely no better choice for this group. Vancouver Titans, Junker Queen Brawl Comp. Hooray! Another repeat! Woohoo! I get it. It's very boring stuff. But the Titans were easily at their most exciting this year during the Summer Showdown, and it's not particularly close. They made their first tournament since late 2020 for crying out loud. That is a major step for a team that has largely been sad to watch in recent memory. And it came off the back of some pretty improved coaching and some explosive playmaking out of Aspire and King. The Titans felt like a real team for the first time in years. There was genuine excitement in their gameplay. A 3-3 record, a positive map differential, a clutch 5-map banger against Washington, and even pushing the shock card. I mean, what else could you really ask for if you're a Titans fan? That is a quality stage for a team that was 0-12 beforehand. It helped jumpstart the potential to at least compete in the play-ins. And regardless of the end result, their skill on this composition provided a well-needed spark that, again, we haven't felt in years out of this franchise. It was only temporary, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope in Vancouver. Enough said. And finally, Washington Justice, Junker Queen Brawl. To be honest, you might see some sort of like Tracer, Sojourn, Dive to be their best comp, which makes sense, it plays up to a lot of their comfort picks at the time, but there was just something special about that Washington team in the Summer Showdown. In spite of so many key players coming and going, they remained competitive throughout, and they got some of their most impressive wins on the season. Major wins over Florida and London, and even pushing the Shock in Dallas to map 5s was pretty crazy to witness, all things considered, and in general, they were in just about every game they played, only getting blown out once. And the caliber of teams they were facing and defeating just makes their success on this comp more impressive than any other points throughout this season. Decay made a seamless transition to Sojourn and didn't miss a single beat, and Assassin acted like he never ever left the starting lineup. Hell, even Kalios and Krillin did a lot better than most expected. It was this Band of Brothers attitude against the entire world. They might have been underdogs during this thing, but it certainly did not feel like it at times with how good their synergy was. And, ladies and gentlemen, that essentially concludes my best comp for every team in 2022. Compared to last year, there were a lot more repeat comps. There was just a lot less variation on what could be run this year, sadly. Very interesting to look back on for sure. And if you enjoyed this video, it would mean a lot to me if you could give it a like and leave a list of your own best comp for every team down in the comments below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.